The emergency klaxon screamed across the bridge of the hegemony battle cruiser Vextera as Captain Zektar watched the human colony ship burning in the void. What should have been a routine extermination had turned into something far more complicated. The humans had fought with a desperation that surprised even the battle-hardened Kethmori warriors, their primitive vessels darting between asteroids like angry insects. "Captain, we're detecting life signs from the wreckage," reported Lieutenant Voss, her clawed fingers dancing across the tactical display. Multiple human signatures scattered across 17 different debris fields. Zektar's scaled hide rippled with annoyance. The Galactic Hegemony's orders had been clear: eliminate the human expansion into Sector 7 Alpha before their aggressive tendencies could spread further. These mammals had already proven themselves dangerously unpredictable, establishing colonies in 12 different systems without permission and showing an alarming tendency to fight back when challenged. "Begin standard salvage protocols," Zektar ordered. "Collect any survivors for interrogation. The Council will want to understand their expansion patterns." The bridge crew moved with efficient precision, their forearms working in perfect coordination as they deployed collection shuttles. The Kethmori had conquered 47 species over the past 3 centuries, and they had developed efficient methods for dealing with survivors. Most species surrendered immediately upon seeing their ships destroyed. Humans, however, had already proven to be different. Commander THYSS materialized beside the captain's chair, her optical camouflage flickering off as she delivered her report. "Sir, the collection teams have retrieved 43 survivors from the wreckage. Most are injured but stable. However, there's something unusual you need to see." Zektar followed THYSS through the ship's corridors to the holding bay, where the human survivors huddled in containment fields. The mammals looked pathetic, soft, weak creatures with no natural armor or claws, their pale skin easily bruised and torn. Yet something in their eyes remained unbroken, a defiance that made Zektar's warrior instincts stir uneasily. "Here, sir." THYSS gestured to a smaller containment field in the corner. "We found this in one of the escape pods." Inside the field lay a human infant, no more than a few months old by their rapid development cycle. The tiny creature was wrapped in some sort of thermal blanket, its large eyes moving curiously as it observed the alien faces peering down at it. Unlike the adult humans, who watched the Kethmori with obvious fear and hatred, the infant showed no such emotions. "A youngling," Zektar mused, studying the small human. "Why would they launch their offspring into space?" "The pod's data core indicates it was programmed for deep space travel," THYSS explained. "Destination, the Outer Rim colonies. They were trying to save their young before the attack." Zektar nodded slowly. Even among their enemies, the protective instincts of parents commanded a certain respect. The Kethmori understood the drive to preserve one's offspring above all else. "What are your recommendations, Commander?" "Standard protocol would be immediate termination," THYSS replied without emotion. "However, this presents an unusual opportunity. We know very little about human development or psychology. This youngling could provide valuable intelligence about their species." The captain considered this. The Galactic Hegemony's xenobiologists had been frustrated by their inability to understand human behavior patterns. Every prediction model they developed had proven incorrect when applied to human actions. Perhaps studying one from birth could provide insights that interrogating adults could not. "Very well," Zektar decided. "Transfer the youngling to Research Division. Have them design a long-term study protocol." As they prepared to leave, the infant made a soft sound that caused both Kethmori to pause. It wasn't the distressed crying they'd expected, but something almost like curiosity. The tiny human had managed to work one arm free from its blanket and was reaching toward them with obvious interest. "Sir," THYSS said slowly, "I'm not certain Research Division has the facilities for long-term care of a human youngling. Their current xenobiology labs are designed for specimen analysis, not child-rearing." Zektar frowned. He hadn't considered the practical aspects of keeping a human infant alive for years of study. The Kethmori reproduced through spawning pools, and Their young emerged already partially developed. Mammalian child-rearing was completely outside their experience. "What would you suggest?" he asked. "Perhaps we could assign it to one of the conquered species," THYSS offered. "The Malari have experience with mammalian biology, though they're herbivores. Or the Zephyrians, though their atmospheric requirements might complicate things." Before Zektar could respond, the bridge communicator crackled to life. "Captain to the command deck immediately. Priority Alpha message from Hegemony High Command." They made their way quickly back to the bridge, where the communications officer handed Zektar a sealed data cylinder. The captain inserted it into his personal reader and scanned the contents, his expression growing more troubled with each line. "New orders," he announced grimly. "We're being reassigned to the outer reaches. Deep Space Patrol, hunting human expansion fleets that have been detected beyond the galactic rim. Mission duration, minimum 5 years." The bridge crew exchanged glances. The outer reaches were a punishment assignment, dangerous and isolated. Ships could go months without contact with the hegemony. It was no place for scientific experiments or specimen care. "Sir, what about the human youngling?" THYSS asked quietly. Zektar stared at the sealed orders, his mind working through limited options. They couldn't take the infant on a combat patrol. Research Division wasn't equipped for long-term care. And returning to port would mean explaining why they deviated from standard termination protocols. "There is another option," he said slowly, an idea forming. "One that might serve multiple purposes." THYSS waited expectantly. "Send a message to Drakmore Station," Zektar ordered. "Tell them we have a research specimen that requires long-term observation. Request assignment to their most experienced xenobiologist." "Sir, Drakmore is a mining station. Their only xenobiologist is Vraktif," Zektar finished. "Yes, I'm aware." A uncomfortable silence fell over the bridge. Everyone knew about Vraktif, the disgraced former hegemony admiral who had been exiled to the mining station after his catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Kepler's Edge. Once the most feared military commander in the galaxy, now reduced to cataloging mineral deposits and studying the station's exotic wildlife. "Captain," THYSS said carefully, "Vraktif is unstable. The reports from Drakmore indicate he's become increasingly erratic since his exile. And he's no xenobiologist. His background is purely military." "Which makes him perfect for this assignment," Zektar replied. "If anyone can understand human nature, it's someone who's fought them in battle. And if the experiment fails..." He shrugged. "It's one less human to worry about." The orders went out within the hour. The human infant would be transferred to Drakmore Station, along with basic care instructions compiled from their database on mammalian biology. Zektar told himself it was a practical solution to an unexpected problem. The baby would likely die within days anyway. Humans were fragile creatures, and Vraktif had no experience with childcare. As the Vextara prepared to depart for the outer reaches, Zektar took one last look at the infant in its containment field. The human was sleeping now, one tiny fist curled against its cheek. For a moment, the captain almost reconsidered his decision. Then, he reminded himself that this was an enemy of the hegemony, a member of a species that had proven too dangerous to coexist with civilized races. The transfer shuttle launched toward Drakmore Station, carrying its unusual cargo into an uncertain future. Neither Zektar nor his crew imagined that this routine disposal of an unwanted prisoner would set in motion events that would eventually shake the very foundations of the galactic hegemony. On Drakmore Station, Vraktif received the incoming shuttle with his usual mixture of boredom and resentment. Another scientific specimen to catalog, another reminder of how far he had fallen from his days commanding entire fleets. He had no idea that the small bundle being transferred to his care would prove to be the most important assignment of his life, one that would transform both the exile and his unexpected ward in ways neither the hegemony nor humanity could have predicted. Drakmore Station hung like a metallic spider in the asteroid field, its mining arms reaching deep into the rich ore deposits of the Kithra Belt. The station housed 300 hegemony personnel, most of them exiles, criminals, or failures who had been banished to this remote outpost where they could serve the Empire without embarrassing it. Former Admiral Vraktit stood at the observation deck of his quarters, watching the mining operations with the same disinterested gaze he'd worn for the past 2 years. His once magnificent ceremonial armor now hung and used in a storage locker, replaced by the simple gray uniform of a station xenobiologist. The mighty Kethmori warrior who had once commanded respect across 12-star systems was now responsible for cataloging the local space slugs and crystalline parasites that occasionally interfered with mining operations. The door chimed, interrupting his brooding. "Enter," he growled without turning around. Security Chief Mektar stepped inside, carrying a small transport container. "Sir, we've received a delivery from the battle cruiser Vexthera. Scientific specimen for your analysis." Vrakth's tail twitched with irritation. "Another space mollusk, I suppose? Or perhaps some exotic bacteria that's eating through the mining equipment?" "No, sir. This one's unusual." Mektar placed the container on Vrakth's desk and activated the viewing portal. "It's alive." Vrakth finally turned from the window, expecting to see another routine biological sample. Instead, he found himself staring at something that made his blood run cold. A human infant, sleeping peacefully in the climate-controlled container. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The transfer manifest lists it as a long-term research subject," Mektar replied nervously. "Human youngling, age approximately 4 standard months. Orders are to observe development patterns and psychological responses over an extended period." Vrakth's claws extended involuntarily as memories flooded back. The Battle of Kepler's Edge, where human fighters had torn through his fleet like a swarm of furious demons. He had lost 3/4 of his ships and nearly 10,000 of his best warriors to these creatures. The defeat had cost him everything: his rank, his honor, his future. "They want me to raise a human," he said slowly, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "The manifest includes basic care instructions," Mektar offered helpfully. "Feeding requirements, environmental needs, typical development milestones. Get out." Vrakth's voice was barely controlled fury. "Leave the creature and get out." After Mektar retreated hastily, Vrakth circled the container like a predator stalking prey. The human infant was so small, so helpless. He could crush it with one hand, and its life with a casual squeeze. It would be mercy, really, saving it from a life of captivity and experimentation. As if sensing his thoughts, the baby stirred and opened its eyes. Large, impossibly blue eyes that looked up at him without fear or understanding. The infant made a soft cooing sound and reached toward him with tiny fingers. Vrakth recoiled as if struck. This was his enemy, the spawn of the species that had destroyed his career and condemned him to this exile. Yet as he looked down at the helpless creature, he found his rage warring with something unexpected: curiosity. The humans at Kepler's Edge had fought with a ferocity that defied all tactical predictions. They had been outgunned, outnumbered, and technologically inferior, yet they had somehow found ways to turn his own strength against him. Their fighters had used suicidal ramming attacks, improvised weapons, and tactics so unpredictable that his centuries of military experience had meant nothing. Now here was a human in its most vulnerable state, completely dependent on his mercy. What was it about these creatures that made them so dangerous? What drove them to fight with such desperate courage? Against his better judgment, Vrakth activated the container's release mechanism. The baby was wrapped in some sort of thermal blanket, and when he lifted it out, he was struck by how impossibly light it felt. Kethmori Young emerged from the spawning pools, already weighing 40 pounds and capable of basic survival. This human was fragile as spun glass. The infant looked up at him and made another soft sound, not distressed, but almost pleased. Its tiny hand reached out and grasped one of his claws with surprising strength. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through Vrakth's nervous system. "What are you?" he murmured, studying the small face with new interest. Over the following days, Vrak found himself drawn into the strange challenge of keeping the human alive. The care instructions were basic at best, clearly compiled by someone with no actual experience in child rearing. He had to jury-rig a feeding system from laboratory equipment, adjust the environmental controls to maintain proper temperature and humidity, and create a sleeping area that would provide the security the infant seemed to need. The baby. He found himself thinking of it as the youngling to avoid the loaded term human, proved to be remarkably adaptable. It accepted the synthetic milk substitute he'd managed to formulate, slept peacefully in the makeshift nursery he'd constructed, and showed an almost disturbing lack of fear toward his alien appearance. More surprising was how quickly it began to respond to his presence. Within a week, the youngling would quiet its crying when he entered the room, track his movements with those impossibly blue eyes, and reach for him when he came near. It was developing recognition patterns far faster than the research data suggested should be possible. Vrak told himself he was simply conducting a scientific experiment. The hegemony's xenobiologists had failed to understand human psychology because they had only studied adult specimens under stress. By observing development from infancy, he might discover the source of human unpredictability that had made them so dangerous in combat. But as the weeks passed, he began to notice changes in himself as well. The bitter anger that had consumed him since his exile began to fade, replaced by something he couldn't quite identify. The routine of caring for the youngling gave structure to his days. He found himself looking forward to feeding times, to the way the baby would reach for him with absolute trust. Station personnel began to whisper about their former admiral. They saw him in the commissary, researching human development patterns. They heard him speaking softly to something in his quarters. Security Chief Mektar reported that Vrak had requisitioned materials to expand his living space and had begun growing what appeared to be recreational plants in his laboratory. 3 months after the arrival of the human infant, everything changed. Vrak was conducting his evening feeding routine when a youngling did something that stopped him cold. As he lifted the bottle away, the baby looked directly into his eyes and made a sound that was unmistakably deliberate. Rak. It wasn't quite his name, but it was clearly an attempt to communicate. Human infants, according to the data files, didn't typically begin vocal communication for several more months. Yet this one was already trying to speak, and its first word was a version of his name. Vrak stared down at the small face, understanding flooding through him like a physical blow. This wasn't just an experimental subject or a war trophy. This was a person, a tiny, vulnerable person who trusted him completely and was trying to form the first bonds of what humans called family. That night, he accessed the station's communication array and sent a coded message to his old intelligence contacts. Within days, he had acquired everything he could find about human child development, psychology, and education. If he was going to do this, he decided he was going to do it properly. The human youngling deserved to grow up understanding both sides of its heritage, its own species' remarkable resilience, and the galaxy it would have to navigate. Vrak began to plan not just for the infant's survival, but for its education. He would teach it about the hegemony, about the different species of the galaxy, about the complex political realities it would face. And perhaps in the process, he would finally understand what made humans so extraordinarily dangerous, and why that might not be entirely a bad thing. As he watched the baby sleep that night, Vrak realized that his exile had become something else entirely. He was no longer just a disgraced admiral killing time on a mining station. He had become something he'd never expected to be, a father. 2 years had transformed both the abandoned mining station quarters and the former admiral who inhabited them. What had once been sterile military efficiency was now a carefully adapted environment designed for a growing human child. Vrak had expanded his living space, installing climbing structures that challenged the boy's developing motor skills, environmental projectors that could simulate different planetary conditions, and a library system containing thousands of educational programs from across the galaxy. The human youngling, Marcus, as Vrak had named him after studying human naming conventions, was no longer the helpless infant who had arrived in a transport container. At 2 years old, he displayed the unsettling combination of curiosity and fearlessness that Vrak was beginning to understand was fundamentally human. The boy had learned to walk by climbing the scaled ridges of Vrak arms, treating his guardian's formidable natural armor as the most natural playground in the universe. "Rak Papa, look," Marcus called out, having mastered his version of Vrak name combined with the human parental designation he'd learned from the educational programs. The toddler was balanced precariously on top of a storage unit, preparing to leap toward a hanging plant that dangled just out of reach. "Marcus, no," Vrak rumbled, but his protest lacked conviction. He had learned that trying to restrict the boy's natural exploratory instincts was both futile and counterproductive. Instead, he had begun teaching Marcus how to fall safely, how to assess risks, and how to trust his own physical capabilities. The boy launched himself through the air with complete confidence, grasped the plant securely, and swung down to land in a perfect crouch. He looked up at Vrak with obvious pride, waiting for approval. "Excellent form," Vrak acknowledged. "But next time, announce your intentions first. A good warrior never surprises his allies unnecessarily." Marcus beamed at the praise and immediately began planning his next acrobatic adventure. Vrak watched him with a mixture of pride and growing unease. The boy was developing faster than any human child on record, showing advanced problem-solving abilities, physical coordination, and social awareness that defied the research data. More troubling, he was beginning to display tactical thinking that reminded Vrak uncomfortably of the human fighters who had defeated him at Kepler's Edge. The communication panel chimed, interrupting his observations. Security Chief Mektar's face appeared on the screen, looking distinctly nervous. "Sir, we have an incoming hegemony inspection team. ETA 6 hours. They're requesting a complete review of all ongoing research projects." Vrak blood chilled. In the 2 years since Marcus's arrival, he had submitted regular reports describing a routine xenobiological study of human development patterns. He had carefully omitted details about the boy's accelerated progress, his own emotional attachment, or the increasingly sophisticated education program he had developed. The hegemony expected to find a cage specimen being observed from a distance, not a family. "Understood," Vrak replied calmly. "Prepare the standard research documentation. I'll need 3 hours to organize the specimen presentation." After closing the communication, Vrak knelt down to Marcus's level. The boy immediately sensed something was wrong and moved closer, his small hand resting on Vrak's massive forearm. "What's wrong, Rak Papa?" The simple question hit Vrak harder than any weapon ever had. In 2 years, this human child had come to trust him completely, to see him as protector and teacher and family all at once. Now that trust was about to be shattered by the reality of their situation. "Marcus," he said slowly, "do you remember the games we've played about different types of people in the galaxy?" The boy nodded eagerly. "The Malari are herbivores, and they're afraid of loud noises. The Zephyrians breathe methane and live in cloud cities. The Kethmori are warriors who value strength and honor." He paused, studying Vrak expression. "Are some different people coming to visit?" "Yes, and they don't understand that you're my son." The words came out before Vrak could stop them, and he realized with shocking clarity that they were true. Somewhere in the past 2 years, this human child had become exactly that, his son in every way that mattered. Marcus frowned. Why don't they understand? How could he explain galactic politics, species warfare, and institutional prejudice to a 2-year-old? How could he make the boy understand that to the hegemony, humans were dangerous enemies to be contained or eliminated, not children to be loved and raised? "They think humans and Kethmori can't be family," Vrak said finally. "They believe we're too different." "That's stupid," Marcus declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. "You're my papa. I'm your son. We're family." Vrak's hearts ached at the boy's innocent confidence. "Yes, we are. But, for now, We need to pretend we're not. Can you be very brave and help me with a difficult game? Over the next 3 hours, VRAC-TH transformed their home back into a sterile research facility. The climbing structures were folded away, the educational materials hidden, the comfortable furniture replaced with standard laboratory equipment. Most painfully, he had to install a containment field in what had been Marcus's bedroom, creating the appearance of a proper research specimen enclosure. Marcus watched these preparations with growing distress, but didn't protest. VRAC-TH had taught him about different kinds of courage, and the boy was demonstrating the most difficult kind, the courage to trust when you don't understand. Remember, VRAC-TH coached him gently. When the visitors come, you must stay in the enclosure. Don't speak unless they ask you direct questions. Don't call me Papa. Can you do this? Marcus nodded solemnly, though his lower lip trembled slightly. Will they hurt you if they find out we're family? The question revealed an understanding that went far beyond the boy's years. Somehow, Marcus had grasped that their relationship was dangerous, not just to him, but to VRAC-TH as well. I don't know, VRAC-TH answered honestly. But I promise you this. No matter what happens, I will never stop being your father, even if we have to pretend otherwise for a while. The inspection team arrived precisely on schedule. 3 hegemony officials representing the science division, military intelligence, and administrative oversight. VRAC-TH received them with the cold professionalism that had once made him one of the most feared commanders in the galaxy. Admiral, excuse me, Dr. VRAC-TH corrected Science Director HFY, her tone conveying exactly what she thought of his fall from grace. We're here to review your research on the human specimen. Of course, VRAC-TH replied smoothly. The subject has provided valuable insights into human development patterns and psychological responses. He led them through the laboratory, presenting fabricated data that suggested slow, normal human development under carefully controlled conditions. Marcus sat quietly in his containment field, and VRAC-TH felt his heart break at how small and alone the boy looked behind the energy barrier. The specimen appears healthy, observed military intelligence officer Drexcon. What have you learned about human aggression patterns? Interesting findings, VRAC-TH replied. Human aggression appears to be largely learned behavior rather than instinctive. The subject shows no hostile tendencies when raised in a controlled environment without exposure to human cultural conditioning. It was a lie, but a useful one. In reality, Marcus was showing all the classic human traits that made the species so formidable: creativity, adaptability, emotional intelligence, and an almost supernatural ability to form bonds across species lines. But VRAC-TH presented him as a docile research animal, safely contained and thoroughly understood. Fascinating, Director HFY mused. This supports the theory that human dangerous could be controlled through proper psychological conditioning. Continue the research. We may want to expand the program if your results remain promising. The inspection team left after 3 hours, satisfied that they had observed a routine xenobiological study. As soon as their ship cleared the station's sensor range, VRAC-TH deactivated the containment field and gathered Marcus in his arms. The boy clung to him fiercely, his small body shaking with delayed reaction to the stress. Did I do good, Papa? You were perfect, VRAC-TH whispered. You were the bravest warrior I've ever seen. But as he held his human son, VRAC-TH realized that their time was running out. Marcus was growing too fast, learning too quickly, becoming too obviously extraordinary to hide much longer. Soon, the hegemony would want to expand their research or move the boy to a more secure facility. When that day came, VRAC-TH would have to make a choice that would define both their futures. The exile who had lost everything at Kepler's Edge now had something worth fighting for again. And this time, he would not allow the hegemony to take it from him. 5 years had passed since the hegemony inspection, and Marcus was no longer a child who could be hidden behind containment fields and falsified reports. At 7 years old, he stood nearly as tall as an adult Malari, his human frame lean and quick with a coordination that even veteran Kethmori warriors found impressive. More importantly, his mind had developed in ways that made VRAC-TH both proud and deeply concerned. The boy had absorbed everything VracTH could teach him about galactic politics, military strategy, xenobiology, and engineering. He spoke 6 different galactic languages fluently and could navigate the station's computer systems with an intuitive understanding that surpassed most adults. But it was his questions that revealed the true scope of his development. "Rackpapa," Marcus said one evening as they shared their meal in the observation lounge, "why do the hegemony reports always describe humans as primitively aggressive when your own battle analyses show they won through superior tactical adaptation?" VracTH paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. 7 years old, and the boy was already identifying contradictions in official propaganda that most hegemony citizens never recognized. "What do you think the answer is?" VracTH asked, falling back on the Socratic method he had adopted from Marcus's education. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his young face serious as he considered the question. "I think they're afraid," he said finally. "Not of human aggression, but of human adaptability. They can understand and counter aggression, but they don't know how to predict adaptation." The insight was so precise, so cutting, that VracTH felt a chill of recognition. This was exactly the kind of thinking that had made human fighters so dangerous at Kepler's edge. Marcus wasn't just learning about the galaxy. He was learning to see through its carefully constructed illusions. "That's a dangerous conclusion to reach," VracTH warned gently. "Most true things are dangerous," Marcus replied with the casual wisdom that never failed to surprise his guardian. "That's why people work so hard to avoid them." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication alert. Security Chief Mektar's face appeared on the screen, his expression grave. "Sir, priority message from Hegemony Command. You're ordered to report immediately to Admiral Kexthor on the battle cruiser Devastation. They're requesting transfer of your research subject for advanced study at the Central Science Institute." VracTH's blood turned to ice. The Central Science Institute was where the hegemony conducted their most invasive research on alien specimens. Species that went there rarely came out alive and never came out unchanged. "When?" VracTH asked, his voice carefully controlled. "They'll be here in 18 hours. The Admiral specifically requested that all research materials be prepared for immediate transfer." After closing the communication, VracTH turned to find Marcus watching him with those impossibly perceptive blue eyes. "They're coming for me, aren't they?" the boy said quietly. VracTH nodded, knowing that lies would serve no purpose now. Marcus had always been able to read him perfectly. "Are you going to let them take me?" The question hung in the air between them like a weapon. VracTH looked at this human child who had become the center of his universe, this brilliant, brave, extraordinary boy who trusted him completely. The answer should have been simple. He was a loyal citizen of the hegemony, bound by duty to follow orders. The boy was officially classified as a research specimen, property of the state. But Marcus wasn't property. He was family. He was the son VracTH had never thought he could have, the future he had never dared to imagine. And VracTH was no longer the blindly obedient admiral who had once followed orders without question. 5 years of watching Marcus grow had taught him that some things mattered more than duty. "No," VracTH said simply. "I'm not." Marcus nodded, as if he had never doubted the answer. "What do we do?" The simple question sparked something in VracTH that had been dormant since his exile, the tactical genius that had made him one of the hegemony's most successful commanders. His mind began working through possibilities, resources, and escape routes with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. "We disappear," he said. "But first, we need to give you a different kind of education." Over the next 16 hours, VracTH activated protocols he had hoped never to use. Hidden weapons caches were opened, encrypted communication channels were established, and long-dormant contacts were reactivated. He also began Marcus's crash course in practical survival skills. "Remember," VracTH instructed as he showed the boy how to operate an emergency beacon. "If we become separated, activate this and hide. Don't try to be heroic. Don't try to save me. Your survival is more important than mine." "No, it isn't," Marcus said firmly. "We're family. We protect each other." Marcus, Papa. The boy used the formal version of the title, his voice carrying an authority that seemed impossible from someone so young. I've been thinking about this for months. You've taught me about honor, about loyalty, about what it means to be Keth Mori. You don't abandon family. Neither do I. Vrak stared at his human son, seeing in those determined blue eyes the same unyielding resolve that had made human fighters so formidable in combat. Marcus had inherited more than just human adaptability. He had absorbed Keth Mori values and combined them with human stubbornness in a way that was both terrifying and magnificent. Very well, Vrak said finally. We protect each other, but you follow my orders in combat situations. Agreed. Agreed. They spent the remaining hours preparing their escape route through the station's mining tunnels. Vrak had identified several abandoned shafts that led to the asteroid field, where a small craft could hide among the ore deposits until it was safe to run for the outer rim. It wouldn't be easy. The hegemony would hunt them relentlessly once they realized what had happened. But it was their only chance. When Admiral Kexthor's ships arrived, they found Drakmor Station operating normally. The mining operations continued. The staff went about their duties, and former Admiral Vrak was nowhere to be found. Security sweeps revealed that his quarters had been abandoned for hours, with no trace of either the disgraced officer or his research specimen. What the hegemony searchers didn't know was that far below the station, in the abandoned mining tunnels, a Keth Mori warrior and his human son were beginning a journey that would take them beyond the reach of any government or authority. Vrak carried the tactical knowledge of one of the galaxy's finest military minds. Marcus carried the adaptive genius of humanity combined with the honor code of the Keth Mori. Together, they represented something new in the galaxy, a fusion of species that transcended the boundaries the hegemony had worked so hard to maintain. They were no longer prisoner and guard, specimen and researcher. They were father and son, mentor and student, and perhaps most dangerously for the established order, they were free. As their small ship slipped away into the asteroid field, Marcus looked back at the only home he had ever known. Will we ever come back? He asked. Vrak considered the question seriously. Someday, he said finally, when you're ready to show the galaxy what humans and Keth Mori can accomplish together. When you're ready to change everything. Marcus smiled, and in that expression, Vrak saw the future. Not just for his son, but for every species in the galaxy that had been told they were too different to coexist. The boy who had been meant as an instrument of understanding had become something far more powerful. A living symbol of what was possible when fear gave way to love. 115 years had passed since the escape for Drakmor Station, and the man standing on the command deck of the Starship Unity bore little resemblance to the frightened child who had once hidden in mining tunnels. Marcus Vraxon, as he had chosen to call himself, honoring both his human heritage and his Keth Mori father, stood 6.5 feet tall, his frame carrying the lean strength of human genetics enhanced by years of Keth Mori warrior training. But it was his mind that truly set him apart. At 22, Marcus had become something the galaxy had never seen. A human raised with complete understanding of galactic politics, trained in advanced military strategy, and educated in the cultural nuances of 47 different species. More importantly, he had grown up seeing the universe not as a collection of competing factions, but as a family that simply hadn't learned to get along yet. Captain, reported his first officer, a young Malari named Sly who had joined their growing crew 2 years earlier, were receiving distress signal from the Zephyrian colony ship Wind's Grace. They're under attack by 3 hegemony destroyers. Marcus turned from the tactical display, where he and Vrak had been planning their next mission. His father, for that's what Vrak was in every way that mattered, looked older now, his scales dulled by years of exile and stress. But his tactical mind remained sharp, and his loyalty to their cause absolute. Analysis, Marcus requested calmly. Standard hegemony expansion protocol, Vrak replied after studying the sensor data. The Zephyrians established their colony without authorization in Sector 12. The hegemony is eliminating them as an example to other species considering unauthorized expansion. Estimated casualties if we don't intervene. All 6,000 colonists, Sikalai said quietly. The Zephyrians are pacifists. They have no military capability. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. This was the third such incident they had encountered in the past year. The hegemony's response to growing unrest among member species had been to crack down even harder on any signs of independence. What they hadn't anticipated was the existence of a ship crewed by refugees from a dozen different species, led by a human who understood exactly how to turn their own tactics against them. Helm, set intercept course. Maximum speed. Marcus moved to his command chair, a custom design that incorporated both human ergonomics and Kethmori aesthetics. Communications. Open a channel to all ships. The main screen split to show the 3 hegemony destroyers surrounding the helpless colony ship. The lead destroyer's captain, a scarred Kethmori veteran named Drakmor, appeared on screen with obvious irritation. Unknown vessel. You are interfering with official hegemony business. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. Captain Drakmor, Marcus replied pleasantly. This is Captain Marcus Vraxon of the Free Ship Unity. I'm here to offer you a choice. The hegemony captain's expression shifted from irritation to shock as he recognized the name. 4 or 5 years, Marcus and his crew had been a growing thorn in the hegemony's side, liberating prisoners, protecting unauthorized colonies, and generally making life difficult for anyone who believed in the old order of species superiority. The human collaborator, Drakmor, snarled, and the traitor Vrakdh hiding behind his pet alien. Marcus felt his father tense behind him, but he remained calm. He had learned long ago that anger was a luxury he couldn't afford in command. Here's your choice, Captain, Marcus continued. You can withdraw peacefully and report that the Zephyrian colony ship suffered a mechanical failure and escaped into hyperspace. Or you could try to destroy us, fail, and then watch as I broadcast recordings of this conversation to every news outlet in the galaxy. You're 1 ship against 3 destroyers, Drakmor laughed. What makes you think you can? The laugh died as Marcus's tactical display lit up with new contacts. 12 ships dropped out of hyperspace around the hegemony force, a mixture of human vessels that had joined Marcus's growing alliance, Kethmori ships crewed by exiles who had followed Vrakdh into rebellion, and vessels from half a dozen other species who had grown tired of hegemony oppression. As I was saying, Marcus said mildly, you have a choice. I should mention that among my allies are 3 former hegemony admirals, the entire crew of the research ship Enlightenment that went missing last year, and about 200 refugees from species the hegemony has tried to exterminate. They're all quite motivated. Captain Drakmor stared at the tactical display, his face cycling through anger, fear, and, finally, a grudging respect. Marcus had learned from his father that most Kethmori commanders could recognize a lost battle when they saw one. You realize this won't end here, Drakmor said finally. The hegemony will hunt you until there's nowhere left to run. Captain, Marcus replied, we stopped running a long time ago. Now we're coming for them. The hegemony ships withdrew without firing a shot, leaving the Zephyrian colony ship free to continue to its destination. As Marcus watched them disappear into hyperspace, he felt Vrakdh's massive hand settle on his shoulder. Proud of you, his father rumbled quietly. You've become everything I hoped you could be. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying the star charts that showed the growing network of free colonies, allied worlds, and resistance cells that had sprung up across the galaxy. What had started as one man's decision to save a human child had become something far greater, a revolution that challenged the very foundations of the galactic order. We're not done yet, Papa, he said, using the childhood name that still made Vrakdh's eyes soften. This was just the beginning. Over the following months, the Unity and its allies struck repeatedly at hegemony installations, liberating prisoners, protecting colonies, and broadcasting the truth about the supposed superiority of the ruling species. Each victory brought more allies, more ships, more hope that change was possible. But it was Marcus himself who became the symbol of that hope. Here was proof that species could cooperate, that differences could be strengths rather than weaknesses, that a human raised by a Kethmori could embody the best qualities of both races while transcending the limitations of either. The hegemony tried everything to stop him: assassination attempts, propaganda campaigns, massive military operations designed to crush the growing rebellion. Nothing worked. Marcus had learned too well from his father, understood too deeply how the galaxy's power structures functioned, and inspired too much loyalty among beings who had been told they were inferior. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Kepler's Edge, the same location where Vrak had suffered his greatest defeat decades earlier. The hegemony assembled the largest fleet in their history, determined to end the rebellion once and for all. They were met by a force that perfectly embodied everything they claimed was impossible. Ships from 30 different species working in perfect coordination under the command of a human who had been raised by their own greatest enemy. When the smoke cleared, the hegemony's fleet was scattered, their command structure in chaos, and their claims of species superiority revealed as the hollow propaganda they had always been. More importantly, Marcus had proven that cooperation was not only possible, but more effective than domination. Standing on the bridge of the Unity as they surveyed their victory, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here, from a helpless infant in a transport container to the leader of a galactic revolution. None of it would have been possible without the love of a broken Kethmori admiral who had chosen family over duty, hope over despair. "What now?" Vrak asked, joining him at the observation window. Marcus smiled, looking out at the mixed fleet of former enemies working together to build something new. "Now we go home, Papa." "We go home and build a galaxy we always knew was possible." The hegemony had given a human baby to their fiercest warrior, expecting him to study it, control it, perhaps destroy it. Instead, they had created their own downfall, a fusion of human adaptability and Kethmori honor that would reshape the entire galaxy. In the end, they had been right about one thing: humans were dangerous. They just hadn't understood that the greatest danger came not from human aggression, but from human love, the ability to see family where others saw only enemies, to find hope where others saw only differences, and to build bridges where others built walls. Marcus Vraxon, the boy who had been meant to be a specimen, had instead become the architect of a new age where all species could stand together as equals. And it had all started with one Kethmori warrior's decision to love an enemy child as his own son.